Well, hello, Wellness Warriors. Welcome to Mind Blowing Mondays. Today we're talking about the impact of diet on food. I put out a video recently about Gerd, a gastroesophageal reflux disorder, and that video was really crazy for me because I didn't really know how to understand all of the information that I was getting. But I put it together and I put something out there for you guys to help you to understand what would Violet do if she was told she had Gerd and didn't want to do surgery and didn't want to have any medication. But today I wanted to go a step further because I wanted to talk about two pieces of the puzzle that I thought eventually came to me afterwards. I felt they're so much more important than I gave them credit for. So the first thing was that overeating piece of the puzzle. Why I feel like this is so important is because from a very young child, I remember being pushed to overeat. I remember being given a plate of food, and there's this idea that you don't get up until you're done. And I know that I'm not alone. This is not due to culture. There's this belief that as adults, we know better how much food our kid can hold and manage than our kid knows. And I actually feel like that's incorrect information. I think that if we want to really help our children be healthy, we need to learn to follow them. We need to learn to allow them to eat to satiation and then see how much that food is and adjust as time moves forward. Because, of course, as our kids get older, they are going to eat more food because they're going to grow and get to be adult size. Now, let's get to the adult size. I believe that even as adults, we tend to overeat. And sometimes a little bit. So we eat till we're full, but sometimes we really overeat. Like past the point of fullness, past the point of anything that makes any kind of sense. And in my mind, I keep asking the question, well, why do we do that? And I really want us to think about the fact that we often believe that because I'm an adult now, I control whatever I do and I'm in charge. And yet we don't realize that the things we learned as small children, the things we've learned along the way of our life from other people have a huge impact on what we do today, especially our parents. And I think we don't give enough credit to the fact that if you were taught to eat a certain amount of food, and if you were taught to eat till full, unless you actively change this idea, you will keep eating until full. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was the kind of foods we're eating. So what became really interesting in my research is I kept seeing this thing that said that the way the stomach functions related to carbohydrates was specific. Now we already know, I hope my wellness warriors already know, that carbohydrates are managed differently, and they're managed much more strictly than the other macronutrients. And one of the most important things that I try to make sure that you guys understand is that our body treats carbohydrates like the dangerous substance that they are, and basically tries to neutralize, tries to manage, tries to get it in a safe position with our body. Usually that means processing them and storing them away as fat. However, reading and what I read to try to understand what exactly is happening in the stomach when food is being processed, I saw another piece of information that makes me think that there's another way that our body tries to manage carbohydrates in the system that's actually much smarter than any of us, well, at least that I was giving it credit for. Because rather than trying to metabolize it and then store it away as fat, which it does, and it does really well, the other thing that it does is that it creates a situation where it just gets passed through us and is not so if the less you metabolize something, the less your body's able to have access to it. One of the things that I remember finding out that I thought was really cool about the human body is that, so obviously this is outside of my body, but the tube that runs through my mouth and out my rear end is also the outside of my body. So it's not internal, even though it's inside of me. It's still outside of my body. If my body can figure out a way to pass something through me, but not let it get into me, so inside of Violet, then it stopped it from harming me. And honestly, what my body does with carbohydrates is it creates a quicker system. So if you eat carbohydrate, your body passes it through faster than if you ate meat or if you ate fat, which then means your body is not metabolizing it as much, right? So it's not digesting it, so therefore you're not going to metabolize it. And that's, as I said in the video, why we can see sometimes veg in our stool, because our body's just trying to pass it through. You know, we work so hard to try to force our body to accept vegetables as healthier than meat, when our body is clearly showing us that there's a preference for meat over vegetables. Meats and fats stay in my stomach longer and allow that processing to happen for a longer period of time. Now, many people will say, oh, but that's because meats and fats are harder to process. Are they really harder to process? I mean, this is a question mark for me right now. I've heard many doctors say, well, actually, no, meats are not harder to process. Veg is harder to process. That's why you need the extremely multiple chambers that the animals that are supposed to eat vegetation have. Much more complicated system to metabolize vegetables versus meat. Easier, so protein sources easier to metabolize. It makes me pause here, right? It makes me wonder if the obvious answer isn't that my body is just trying to pass it through so it does the least amount of harm to me as possible. These are Violet's guesses. Again, not a doctor. I'm just telling you the things that stood out to me. The more I read, the more I let myself understand this process. And it brings me to the bigger kind of conversation that I want us to have today, guys. You know, it's the holiday season. Today, it's Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to all my Canadian viewers. American Thanksgiving is going to be coming up in November. We have Halloween around the corner. And the question is, am I really allowing myself to understand the huge impact that food has on my health? Am I allowing myself to continue to call candy, chocolate, cake, chips? Am I allowing myself to call that stuff food? Cereal, granola bars. Am I allowing myself to call that stuff food? We can go far in this conversation because there's lots of things that I think that are marketed to us as healthy that are clearly not healthy, that are clearly not helping us to do anything good for ourselves. And I want us to do the thing that's healthier. In order to do that, I need to let myself understand that when my stomach acid, so let's go back to Gerd for a second because that's the topic for today. When my stomach acid gets to the point where I've eaten, it's normal that it's going to go higher, so it'll be less acidic. And what was interesting to me, so I want to thank C Sharp for pointing out, he said, don't be misled by the pH values, folks. It's a logarithmic scale, so pH value of 1 is 100,000 times as acidic as a pH of 5. And I'm glad that he mentioned that because I'll be honest with you, I was a little confused. How is it that tomato and other vegetables could be at 2.8, let's say, and lemon could be at 2, so they're not too far apart, but my stomach is 1, and I know that's fairly acidic, but then battery acid is 0. So in my brain, the difference between 0 and 1, and between 1 and 2, and between 2 and 3, like, I didn't understand that it was a logarithmic scale, which means that the difference between 0 and 1 is hugely different than the difference between 1 and 2. And so it explains why it is that you cannot touch battery acid. You can touch stomach acid. It's not going to be pleasant. It is going to burn you. You can touch lemons. They don't burn you like at all if you don't leave them on too long. So it was really hard for me to try to understand like the difference there. So I do appreciate C# pointing that out. So then it made me think, at the end of the day, all the foods that I end up eating, whether I eat some meat, or I eat some vegetables, or I eat some fish or eggs, what is changing the way that my stomach is reacting to them? And from the medical stuff, so the scientific stuff that I found, it wasn't the acidity, interestingly enough. It was the carb count. Foods that are higher in carbohydrate are passed through the stomach faster on purpose by the stomach. And the question is always for me going back to, why would our stomach do that? And I don't believe that our stomach is doing it accidentally. The longer things stay in the stomach, the more they break down, the more metabolizing they will be engaged in. And I feel like my stomach, when it notices there's carbs in there, passes it through. Now, we're really smart, and we've created situations where our stomach can't help but process these foods because we've already pre-processed them for the stomach, right? All of the processed foods that make the situation where now my stomach is able to quickly get nutrients out of, like, what would have been really hard. So if you were to pull the grain off the plant and say, okay, eat that violet and process it. First of all, how hard it is. Second of all, right? So, and then it would get to my stomach and there's a hull on it, and then there's a protective layer. There's all these layers to whatever wheat or any grain that you pull straight off of a tree or plant. Compared to if I've taken that wheat and I've ground it and machined it and turned it into flour, and I've taken away the hull, and I've taken away, and now I just have this nice white fluffy flour. It's not hard for my stomach to go in there with the acid that it has and get that into my blood system. No matter what my stomach is trying to do to protect me, if I'm too smart for my own good and create the story where my body can still have access to all this sugar, then yes, now my body's going to have to process that because it's going to get digested and it's not going to be coming out the other end pretty much intact, which we know can happen if we don't overly process things. Why is this important for us to understand? I often hear people ask questions like, well, how come, we were able to eat this way in China, or how come, in these Asian countries, and how come in Africa, and how come, and part of the reason that I think that some of these countries were able to still eat more carb than we were for much longer. Now, don't get me wrong, the playing field has leveled out, but I think the reason they were able to go longer before it got leveled out is because they didn't have the access to the processed foods that we have, and they didn't do as much processing to the natural versions of the foods that they were eating. If they were eating some kind of grain that wasn't run through the machines that we were running it through, if they were doing pestle and mortar type situation, that's not as processed as what we're able to do with these gigantic machines. And I do feel it's a huge impact on the quality of the food that they're eating, and therefore allowing them to be healthier, eating what looks like the same. It's not the same. If I go and get a piece of sugar cane and chew on that sugar cane to get that juice out, I'm getting nowhere near the amount of carbohydrate out of that piece of sugar cane that I will get if I just take a teaspoon of sugar. The time, energy, effort that it will take me I don't even know if I would be able to get that 5 grams of carbs from that teaspoon of sugar. I'm not sure if that's the right amount, but whatever. You know my point. So we need to be aware that the foods we eat impact the health we have. And in the coming weeks, we have, for example, Halloween coming up. Are you allowing yourself to eat chocolate, to eat candies, to eat chips, and are you allowing your children to eat those things? Wellness warriors, we really do need to take a serious step back and try to understand that these things that we call food aren't food, and they're contributing to our poor health. Okay. I had another comment that I wanted to touch on. If you guys want me to read your comments, please put them in the if you comment on a Saturday video, I will take the best ones and read them on Monday morning. And today I'm getting a comment from Tammy Cruz. Hi, Tammy. She said, I have a family member that had Gerd, and the diet they had him on made him sicker by the day. After about 6 months, he called me to ask if I knew anything that could help him. I told him dump the diet. I encouraged him to make his own bone broth, chicken and beef, start an intermittent fasting, start out slow, 14-10, and then move to 16-8 in the second week. He went forward and did a 24. While he was in his eating window, he was having bone broth. He decided on his own to eat only beef, bacon, and eggs. So what's really interesting to me about this comment is that this person went full on carnivore to solve his GERD situation, which goes back to what I think I was understanding about how carbohydrates affect the body and how our body is railing against. So when this person stopped putting carbs in, he decided to do that on his own. And inside of 1 month, his health made a huge improvement, and he's now an avid carnivore. This is a year later. Last month was 1 year. If you guys are getting value out of this video, please like it, because it does help for more people to see it. And I want this message to get out. It's important for us to understand that, all he did was remove the carbohydrates. Okay, he drank bone broth for a while. Some people are going to say, oh, but the bone broth allowed his throat to soothe. I can't stress this enough. As soon as you put anything in your mouth, whether it's carbohydrate or protein sourced anything, so if my mouth tastes sweet or not, my stomach starts to produce acid immediately. So even if the bone broth was helping something, it was helping on the throat side. It was not irritating the throat. So is that what's going to solve GERD, though? See, the problem isn't what's happening on the throat side. The problem is what's happening to stop the valves in the stomach from closing. So this is another thing that I learned. And I was able to find my source of where I had seen that it's both valves that were controlled. So it is both valves that are controlled by the acidity in your stomach. And having too low of a acidity in your stomach, which is something that happens when doctors put us on antacids because we have GERD or acid reflux or heartburn or the total, all the ways that we name this situation that we're talking about today. And when that stomach acid is too low, the valves cannot close. And then we add to that if bile is able to get back up into the chamber because the lower pyloric valve doesn't close. Guess what happens? I've lowered the acidity in my stomach again because bile is neutralizing to acidity. And what's going to happen is, of course, this one is going to stop closing and I can have regurgitation. It is such a process. We want the food to travel in one direction. And in all of this, how many times have I heard people say, oh my goodness, it was Halloween, I had leftover candy, so I didn't give it all away. And in the next few days, oh my goodness, I ate so much candy. What are all of those carbs doing in our stomach, right? So our body's trying to pass them through, but then in the passing them through, are we creating the situation where some bile can get back in? Because to me, I just feel like on top of it is processed food. Being processed food, no matter how fast my body tries to pass it through, it still can be metabolized because it's processed food. It's already in a scenario where it's easy for my body to pick it up. So dangerous. And I want us to understand how dangerous it really is. It's important for us, first and foremost, to eat real, whole foods. It's important for us, second of all, to prioritize eating less carb and more protein and fat. And the most important third thing is that it's important for us to eat to satiation, not overeating and creating a physical reason that my stomach would have a hard time processing what's in it, and creating the situation where I can be the healthiest version of myself that I possibly can. Since it is Thanksgiving here in Canada, if we don't have more questions, I'm going to let you guys go because I'm going to go back home and spend some time with the family. I want to thank you for watching Mind Blowing Mondays. I really appreciate you guys coming by. I love making these videos for you guys. And I can't wait to talk to you all again next week.